In this episode, we're going to be talking about how a Christian can navigate and live in a world that is postmodern, or a world that has become post-truth, that no longer believes in absolute truth anymore, on Soul 02. And welcome to Soul 02. Our goal is to help people find Christ, and if you don't know Christ, to discover him by the times together that we have. And if you know Christ, to be encouraged and to know how to live in this world we live in. So we want to give oxygen to the follower of Christ at the same time. And we're talking about what is postmodernism and why should I care? Why should a Christian care? And we live in a world that is so different than it was even 30, 40 years ago, that it's like a new planet almost. And we had been talking about the idea that that when modernism came, right, which was before postmodernism, there's different generations, different seasons that came in the world, and you had the Bronze Age, you had the Renaissance, and all these things. These were different epochs or different seasons that lasted for hundreds of years. Modernism lasted for hundreds of years before postmodernism came, and postmodernism began in the after World War II, and in the 60s really kind of bloomed. And we kind of talked about last week what that means, like why we should care about that. And today I want to talk about how do we navigate it? How do we navigate a postmodern world? How do we, as Christians, live in a postmodern world and still retain our witness for Christ, still retain our testimony, so to speak, and yet help people to find Christ? How do we do that? How do we do that in a loving way and in a way that is effective, that is not modern, because modernism doesn't work today. You can't just go to someone and say, repent you sinner, here's 5 reasons why, because modernism was based on reasoning and logic and arguments. Postmodernism is the opposite. It's based on gut intuition. It says, well, this is my truth, this is what I feel reality is. So how do you live in that kind of world if you're a Christian? And well, the first thing you can do is you can do what you've always done. You can say, I'm going to ignore the fact that the world is postmodern and just live in my bubble and just kind of hide in my hobbit hole. Or you can do what Paul did in 1 Corinthians 9:20, where he said, to the Jews, I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law. In other words, he's saying, I'm with them. I kind of spend time with them, live my life with them, and love on them. Even though I'm not under their kind of belief, I still retain my belief. So he's not compromising here. He goes on to say that I might win those under the law. So those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those under the law. And again, he's not compromising his relationship with Christ here, but he's becoming part of their world, and he's loving them where they are, the way families live out their lives while they can disagree with each other about the most profound subjects. And he goes on to say, to the weak I become weak, that I might win the weak. If he saw someone who was vulnerable, he went there in a vulnerable way and loved on them and brought Christ to bear to the situation. That's how Paul did it. And he goes on to say, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. So this is what we can do. And that brings me to the second part of what we should do. Engage postmodern culture. Do what Paul did. Don't run away from it. Don't try to act modern and bring modern ideas of the modern generation that came before. But learn what it means to be postmodern in this culture and how people process what you say. Affirm what is right in modernism, or rather postmodernism. If there's one thing postmodernism did well, is that it said reason and logic is not enough to save me. That's not enough. I need more than 5 reasons why I should serve Jesus. And so they did that correctly, because you need more than that. You need experience. You need to experience God. You need to know that God is real, and then he could come into your heart and life and transform you and change the way that you think and give you a new spiritual heart. And at the same time we do that, we can challenge what is wrong with postmodernism. And we kind of had a list of that last time we talked together. And the most glaring thing that is wrong with it is that there's no absolute truth. That absolute truth is whatever I make of it, it's my truth. That's the most glaring problem with postmodernism. And postmodernism argues that there's no such thing as one universal truth that rules everything else, that regulates everything else. And the problem with saying that is that by saying there's no absolute truth, they're making an absolute statement. So it's contradictory in a sense. But here's the point. Make sure that you're fighting for the right thing. Make sure that you're contending for the right thing. You're not trying to Christianize people. You're not trying to convert them to your doctrine or your idea of what Christianity is. You're trying to get them to meet Christ for themselves and to learn what that means and to come under his rule and his reign. That's the goal here. And we don't want the good old days of modernism where convincing people with our fancy arguments was the goal, and expecting them to believe and fall on their faces and believe because our arguments are so phenomenal. At face value, trust us and believe God and believe our absolute statements. That's not the goal here anymore. In fact, much superiority in arguments went with that. But our goal is to bring them to Christ and help them to find Christ in their way. I don't mean by their own rules, but I mean in their way to become a disciple of Christ. Not necessarily, I've won people to Christ that later on became part of a different faith tradition that even disagrees with my faith tradition. You know what? I'm okay with that. Man, just find Christ. Who cares? Here's the third thing you can do in engaging postmodern culture today. Change your methods without changing your methods. Let me put it to you this way. Change your methods without changing your message. That is something that was I think, invented, that idea by a pastor in Phoenix named Tommy Burnett, which is a brilliant idea, that we can change our methods because methods aren't sacred, right? But we can't change the message. The message is eternal. That strikes at the very heart of postmodernism, that God doesn't change. That yes, God is in charge. Yes, there is absolute truth, and that truth is Christ. That's the message. But the methods of getting there aren't that important. However, some postmodern churches or church approaches can confuse this idea and change the method, but also alter the message. What do I mean by that? Some postmodern churches try to reinvent the wheel by reworking the Bible in a way that compromises its integrity. They kind of soften anything that talks about repentance or sin, and they make it so easy for anyone to be a Christian that it loses its profound meaning, period. That there's no difference between a Christian and a non-Christian. And some even go as far as to say, well, the Old Testament is kind of like, we don't really focus on that. It's not relevant or important for today. Or they might say, it's all about love and grace, but they never mention discipleship. When I say discipleship, I mean the call that Jesus gave to become his disciples, to follow him, to submit to his rule and reign, to come under his authority. This is why Paul said that the gospel was the power of God for salvation. Why? Because the power of God transforms your life forever. It literally takes over your life. In a postmodern rendering of Romans 1:16, which is what I just read, is the power of humanity to love one another. That's salvation. And we have to always be careful to maintain a distinction between compromising the message versus what it means to change methods. Here's number 4. What can I do to engage postmodern culture and live out my Christianity as a postmodern Christian? We can demonstrate the power and presence of God in our life. Now, my faith tradition believes that God can heal you, and He does. I've seen it. God heals you, God speaks to you, and God does miracles in your life. And many of the church fathers believed in this, that God moves in that way. Now, some faith traditions don't believe in this. They say, well, it's not for today and all this. Well, then you figure it out in your way. But here's what I'm saying to you today, that postmoderns believe in things that are outside of logic, outside of provable science, because they believe in that intuitive idea, right? And, well, it's my truth. So that's a great opportunity for a believer of Christ or a follower of Christ to say, you know what? I've seen God do a miracle in my life. I've seen God bring great provision in my family when there was a great need. I've seen God heal my body. I've seen God do a miracle where I prayed for someone and their lives turned. And that's what I mean by the power and presence of God. God can literally show up in your bedroom and save you. God can show up at your job and touch your life and bless you. This is what we have to bring to the postmodern world. The fact that God is real and powerful. And one last thing we can do to engage a postmodern culture is this. Use your superpower. Every follower of Christ has a superpower. What do I mean by that? Our power, our superpower is our story. What has Jesus Christ done in your life? How did He change the trajectory of your life? How did He transform you? How did He bring you to the place where you are following Him today? What miracles has He done? What incredible things has He done where you want to share with somebody and say, you know what? You can't give up because God did this in my life. This is what I mean by your story. They can argue with your arguments. They can question your logic, but they can't question or doubt what God did for you. They can't change your story or what God did for you because you were there, they weren't. And postmoderns connect with stories. When you say a story, man, they're right there with you. And this is why Jesus was a storyteller. He was more of a storyteller really than a modern style preacher that uses all these arguments and all these things that convince you. He just told stories. And out of the stories, great principles of truth were drawn. And postmoderns connect with story. And this is why I'm saying today that it is vitally important that we as followers of Christ bring our story into the world of pain and struggle and how God has helped us in our story. So if you find this podcast a blessing, I'm going to ask you to just like us and subscribe to us, to the channel, because we want to help a lot of people. So thanks so much for listening today, and may God be with you. God bless.